Hello, and welcome to Mythos and Logos. They were too troublesome for heaven to contain, yet too divine for earth to accept. Here lies one of Scripture's most disturbing paradoxes. Beings of such terrible power that their very existence threatened the fabric of creation, yet whose destruction required nothing less than the drowning of an entire world. The Nephilim, those impossible hybrids born from the union of angels and humans, present us with a mystery that has haunted humanity for thousands of years. How could the sons of God, created to serve and protect, become the very catalyst for humanity's near extinction? Tonight, we will journey through the shadowed valleys of antediluvian history, where giants walked and heaven wept. We will explore the ancient texts that religious authorities tried to suppress, decode the warnings hidden in Genesis, and uncover why every culture on Earth remembers a time when Titans ruled. Our investigation will take us from the summit of Mount Hermon, where angels swore their terrible oath, to the archaeological sites, where massive stones defy explanation, to the final battles where shepherds faced the last descendants of these ancient beings. Before we dive in, I'd be grateful if you could hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support truly helps the channel grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. I'm also fascinated by our global community here. Please share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. And now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away, and let us travel back to the dawn of human memory, to a time when the boundary between heaven and earth was gossamer thin, when divine beings walked freely among mortals, and when the morning stars still sang together in harmony. Close your eyes and imagine the world before the flood, when the earth itself groaned under the weight of beings never meant to exist, and heaven watched in growing horror at what love between the divine and mortal could create. Part 1. Origins and Cosmic Context. When heaven touched earth, the Genesis mystery. The 6th chapter of Genesis contains perhaps the most cryptic passage in all of Scripture. In just 4 verses, between the genealogies of patriarchs and the story of Noah's Ark, we encounter words that have troubled theologians for millennia. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. The Hebrew term here, B'nai ha-Elohim, literally translates to sons of God, a phrase that appears elsewhere in Scripture, exclusively to describe angelic beings. These were not metaphorical sons, not righteous descendants of Seth as later commentators would desperately argue, but something far more unsettling, divine beings who looked upon humanity with desire. The text continues with terrible simplicity. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, men of renown. The word Nephilim itself carries dark weight, some translate it as fallen ones, from the Hebrew root naphal, meaning to fall. Others render it as giants, pointing to the Greek Septuagint's translation as gigantes. But the most disturbing interpretation suggests it means those who cause others to fall, beings whose very existence led humanity toward corruption. Consider the cosmic violation this represents. The boundary between heaven and earth, between the spiritual and physical realms, was never meant to be crossed in this manner. Angels, according to ancient Jewish understanding, were created as ministering spirits, beings of pure energy and purpose, who could take physical form, but were never intended to participate in the biological imperatives of earthly life. They were watchers, guardians, messengers, but never participants in human generation. Yet here, in these sparse verses, we learn that some among them chose to abandon their celestial nature for something they saw in human women, something beautiful enough to make them forfeit eternity. The Genesis account provides maddeningly few details, yet what it does reveal sends ripples through the entire biblical narrative. These unions produced offspring described with 2 crucial terms, Gibborim, meaning mighty ones, or warriors, and men of renown, literally, men of the name, or men of reputation. These were not merely large humans, but beings of such power. and presence that their names echoed through generations. They were the heroes and tyrants of the antediluvian age, creatures caught between two natures, possessing both the strength of heaven and the passions of earth. What Genesis merely hints at, other ancient sources describe in terrifying detail. The Book of Jubilees tells us these beings stood as tall as cedar trees. The Book of Giants, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, speaks of offspring who consumed the earth's resources with insatiable hunger. But Genesis itself remains mysteriously silent about the specifics, offering only the ominous observation that follows. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The watchers vigil, guardians who fell. Before they became the fallen, they were the watchers, the Gregorian Greek, the ones who are awake, or ones who watch. Picture them stationed at the boundaries between dimensions, eternal sentinels, whose purpose was to observe humanity's development and report to the throne of heaven. They were teachers and guides, appointed to watch over the early generations of mankind, never sleeping, never resting, their eyes forever turned toward earth, while their essence remained anchored in the celestial realm. The Book of Enoch, that controversial text, preserved primarily in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, provides what Genesis withholds: names, motivations, and devastating consequences. According to Enoch, 200 of these watchers, under the leadership of one called Semyaza or Shemihaza, made a pact that would shatter the cosmic order. They gathered on the summit of Mount Hermon, that snow-capped peak where even today the borders of Lebanon, Syria, and Israel meet, and there they swore an oath, binding themselves together in their transgression. Each took a human wife, but more than that, each committed to teaching forbidden knowledge to humanity. The text names 20 of their leaders, angels whose names once inspired awe, now become synonymous with rebellion: Azazel, who taught humans to forge swords and shields, to wage war with terrible efficiency; Barakal, who revealed the secrets of astrology; Kokabel, who mapped the constellations; Penemuel, who instructed in writing and wisdom that humans were not yet ready to possess. Each gift was a violation, each lesson a crack in the divine plan that required humanity to develop gradually, to earn their knowledge through experience and growth, rather than receive it wholesale from beings who understood the fundamental forces of creation. You stand at night beneath the ancient sky, the same stars the watchers once called by name burning above you. You can almost understand the temptation they faced. Day after day, century after century, they observed human women not as distant subjects, but as individuals. Their laughter, their sorrow, the way morning light caught in their hair, the grace of their movements as they drew water from wells or danced at harvest celebrations. The watchers possessed knowledge of the universe's architecture, understood the songs that held atoms together, yet they had never known the simple pleasure of human touch, the warmth of companionship that wasn't bound by cosmic duty. In their watching, they began to want, and in their wanting, they began to fall. The tragedy of the watchers extends beyond mere lust or rebellion. These were beings created in perfection, radiating the glory of the divine presence, who chose to diminish themselves for the chance at experiences they were never designed to have. They traded immortality for mortality, exchanged their place in the celestial chorus for the fleeting pleasures of earthly existence. Some traditions suggest they knew the cost from the beginning, that Semyaza himself hesitated, fearing he alone would bear the punishment for their collective sin. But the oath they swore bound them together, each angel's fate sealed to his brothers, a dark covenant that would ensure none could retreat once the descent began. The Watcher's fall represents more than a simple rebellion. It was a fundamental break in the created order. These beings, positioned between God and humanity as intermediaries and protectors, instead became predators and corruptors. Their children, the Nephilim, inherited their father's supernatural strength, but also their mother's human appetites, creating beings of immense power driven by uncontrollable desires. Before the waters rose, the antediluvian world. The world before the flood exists in human memory like a dream half remembered upon waking, fragmentary and strange. According to the chronologies in Genesis, this was a time when human lifespans stretched across centuries, when Methuselah lived 969 years, and Adam himself walked the earth for nearly a millennium. Into this already mysterious age came the Nephilim, and with them, a corruption so complete that God would declare his regret at creating humanity at all. Imagine the earth in those days. Vast forests, unmarred by axe or fire, rivers running pure from mountain springs, animals still unafraid of human presence. The population was small but growing, scattered in settlements across the fertile crescents of the ancient world. Technology was primitive yet sufficient. Humans had learned to cultivate crops, domesticate animals, work metal, and build cities. Cain had established the first city, Enoch, named after his son. His descendants had become musicians, metalworkers, and nomadic herders. This was civilization in its infancy, humanity taking its first tentative steps toward mastery over nature. Then came the Watcher's descent, and everything changed. The knowledge they brought was not earned through trial and error, not developed through generations of innovation, but downloaded directly into human consciousness like fire stolen from heaven. Suddenly, humans understood metallurgy, not just as craft but as science. They learned to read the stars not just for navigation but for divination. They discovered herbs and roots that could heal or harm, words of power that could bind or loose, symbols that could channel forces beyond the physical realm. It was an explosion of advancement without the wisdom to properly wield it. Power without restraint, knowledge without understanding. The Nephilim themselves grew to dominate this transformed landscape. Ancient texts described them as giants in both stature and appetite, beings who required vast amounts of food to sustain their hybrid physiologies. The Book of Enoch claims that when normal food sources were exhausted, they turned to devouring animals, then humans, and finally, even each other. Whether literal or metaphorical, these accounts paint a picture of consumption without satisfaction, of beings whose very existence upset the ecological balance of the ancient world. Violence became the defining characteristic of the age. Genesis states that the earth was filled with violence, the Hebrew word Hamas, suggesting not just physical brutality, but a corruption of justice. Itself, a complete breakdown of moral order. The Nephilim, with their supernatural strength and their human passions, became tyrants and warlords. They took whatever they desired, destroyed whatever opposed them, and transformed the earth into a realm of perpetual conflict. The mighty men of old, men of renown, were remembered not as heroes, but as oppressors, whose very names inspired terror. The atmospheric pressure of evil became so dense that even the natural world groaned under its weight. Some rabbinical traditions suggest that the animals themselves became corrupted, that the boundaries between species began to blur as the cosmic order continued to unravel. The earth, created as a garden, had become an arena of horror where might alone determined right, where the hybrid offspring of angels and humans ruled through fear and consumption. Yet perhaps the most tragic aspect of the antediluvian world was the complete pollution of human potential. Humanity, created in the image of God and intended to grow gradually into wisdom and dominion, had been catastrophically accelerated past their ability to cope. They possessed the tools of gods, but the wisdom of children, the power to reshape the world, but not the restraint to preserve it. Every imagination of the thoughts of their hearts had become continuously evil, not through natural development, but through contamination by beings and knowledge they were never meant to encounter. The world before the flood had become a cosmic crime scene, requiring nothing less than a complete cleansing to restore any hope of redemption. Part 2. Discovery and Transmission. Fragments from the Dust. The discovery of ancient texts. The year was 1947, and a Bedouin shepherd named Mohammed Ed-Dib was searching for a stray goat among the limestone cliffs near the Dead Sea. The stone he threw into a cave produced not the bleating of his lost animal, but the distinctive sound of shattering pottery. That small moment of curiosity, that decision to investigate rather than move on, would unveil the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century, and return to the world texts that had been hidden for 2,000 years, including detailed accounts of the Nephilim that religious authorities had long considered lost or deliberately suppressed. Within the caves of Qumran lay ceramic jars, their contents preserved by the desert's perfect aridity, scrolls of leather and papyrus that had waited through the rise and fall of empires. Among the hundreds of manuscripts were fragments of the Book of Giants, a text mentioned in ancient sources but never before seen in modern times. Here, written in Aramaic, were the names of the Nephilim themselves, Oya and Haya, the twin sons of Semyaza, Mahwe, the son of Barakel, Gilgamesh, that legendary king whose name echoed through Mesopotamian mythology. These were not distant myths, but detailed genealogies, accounts that treated the giants as historical figures whose deeds had been carefully recorded. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had been saying it all along. In their mountain monasteries, in conditions far different from Qumran's desert caves, they had preserved complete manuscripts that the rest of Christianity had abandoned. The Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, texts that expanded the sparse Genesis account into a full narrative of angelic rebellion and its consequences. While European Christianity debated whether the sons of God might simply be the righteous line of Seth, Ethiopian scribes continued to copy accounts of 200 angels descending on Mount Hermon, their names, their teachings, their hybrid children who consumed the earth. You hold one of these ancient fragments in your hands, the papyrus so fragile it seems ready to dissolve at your touch. The letters are faded brown against amber, written in careful Aramaic script by someone who believed these words important enough to preserve. You realize you're reading an eyewitness account, or at least what claimed to be one, of beings whose existence threatened the boundary between myth and history. The scribe who penned these words lived in a world where the memory of the giants was still fresh enough to inspire both awe and terror, close enough in time that the massive stones they supposedly moved still bore the marks of their impossible strength. The discovery pattern repeated across the ancient world. In Egypt, the Nag Hammadi library yielded Gnostic texts that spoke of archons and fallen powers. In Iraq, archaeological excavations uncovered Mesopotamian tablets describing the Anunnaki, beings who descended from heaven and bred with human women. The Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest written story, featured a hero who was himself 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, a mathematical impossibility that suddenly made sense if one considered hybrid ancestry from beings not entirely of this world. Every culture, it seemed, had preserved fragments of the same cosmic violation. What emerged from these discoveries was not a single narrative, but a mosaic of testimonies, each piece reflecting the same terrible event through different cultural lenses. The names changed, the details varied, but the core remained consistent. There was a time when beings from above took human wives, produced offspring of tremendous power, and fundamentally corrupted the early world. These were not independent myths, but parallel memories of a shared catastrophe. The book that almost vanished, Enoch's Forbidden Chronicle. The Book of Enoch should not exist. By all logic of history, by every pattern of textual preservation, this book should have vanished into obscurity, along with countless other ancient writings deemed too dangerous, too strange, or simply too inconvenient for Orthodox faith. The early church fathers quoted it extensively. Jude, the brother of Jesus, directly cited it in his canonical epistle. Yet by the 4th century, church councils had declared it apocryphal, unfit for inclusion in the biblical canon. The book went underground, disappeared from Western Christianity entirely, and should have been lost forever. But texts, like the truth they contain, have a way of surviving despite human efforts at suppression. Consider the journey of this forbidden chronicle. Enoch, the 7th from Adam, the man who walked with God and was no more, for God took him, allegedly wrote or dictated these visions before his translation to heaven. His book contained not just the story of the Watcher's fall, but detailed cosmologies, elaborate descriptions of heaven's architecture, prophecies extending to the end of time, and most dangerously, an unflinching account of how heaven's own sons became Earth's greatest threat. The text named names, provided dates, described consequences that made the sparse Genesis account look like a carefully edited summary designed to hide more than it revealed. The early Christian church faced a dilemma. Many of their foundational teachers had accepted Enoch as scripture. Tertullian defended it vigorously, arguing that if Jude quoted it, it must be inspired. Origen referenced it as authoritative. The Epistle of Barnabas cited it directly. Yet the book's contents proved increasingly problematic for a church trying to establish clear boundaries between orthodox and heretical belief. The detailed angelology, the suggestion that divine beings could sin after creation, the implication that evil had entered the world through heavenly rebellion rather than purely human choice, all these elements threatened carefully constructed theological systems. So they made it disappear, or tried to. The Western Church removed it from circulation, discouraged its copying, relegated it to the category of dangerous books that might confuse the faithful. By the medieval period, European Christianity had so thoroughly erased it that many theologians doubted whether such a book had ever existed. The references in Jude were explained away, the patristic citations dismissed as referring to some other text, the entire tradition of Enochic literature reduced to legend. You are a monk in medieval Europe, carefully copying approved texts in your monastery's scriptorium. You've heard whispers of books that contain dangerous knowledge, texts that the church has wisely hidden from those who might be led astray. You've been taught that everything necessary for salvation exists within the approved canon, that curiosity about forbidden books is itself a form of pride. Yet sometimes, in the margins of approved texts, you find references to something called the Book of Enoch, quotes that seem to explain mysteries the canonical Bible only hints at. You wonder what truths might be so dangerous that heaven itself would want them hidden. But in Ethiopia, isolated from European Christianity by geography and Islamic expansion, the book never disappeared. Ethiopian Christians continued to read it, copy it, treat it as scripture. Their priests studied it, their artists illustrated it, their tradition embraced what others had rejected. When European scholars finally encountered complete Ethiopian manuscripts in the 18th century, they discovered that the Book of Enoch hadn't vanished at all. It had simply been preserved by those who refused to forget. The book's survival against such odds suggests something profound about the nature of truth and human memory. Despite systematic suppression, despite theological opposition, despite the passage of 2 millennia, the story of the Watchers and their giant offspring refused to die. It survived in fragments quoted by church fathers who opposed it, in traditions maintained by cultures at the periphery of Christian orthodoxy, in parallel accounts preserved by entirely different religions. The Book of Enoch emerged from its hiding, like the Dead Sea Scrolls from their caves, carrying with it the uncomfortable testimony that the Nephilim were never meant to be forgotten, that their existence was too significant to erase, that some truths are too powerful for even the most determined suppression to completely destroy. Part 3. The Cosmology of Giants. The architecture of heaven, angelic orders, and divine boundaries. Heaven, according to ancient Hebrew cosmology, was never the simple clouded paradise of popular imagination, but rather a complex hierarchy of beings, each with designated purpose and carefully delineated authority. The Watchers who would father the Nephilim came from a specific tier in this celestial architecture, and understanding their original position helps us grasp the magnitude of their transgression. They were not the highest seraphim who burned with holy fire around God's throne, nor were they the cherubim who guarded sacred spaces with flaming swords. The Watchers occupied a middle realm, close enough to earth to observe humanity's daily struggles, elevated enough to comprehend divine purposes. The Book of Enoch describes 7 heavens, each with its own inhabitants and functions. The Watchers were stationed in the 5th heaven, a realm of perpetual vigilance, where angels maintained ceaseless observation of earthly events. Below them, in lower heavens, moved the angels who controlled weather patterns, guided celestial bodies, and carried human prayers upward. Above them dwelt beings of such pure spirit that physical manifestation was foreign to their nature. The Watchers existed at the perfect intersection of knowledge and temptation, aware enough of human life to develop fascination, powerful enough to act on their desires, yet bound by laws that prohibited such action. Picture the divine court as described in Daniel and Ezekiel, thousands upon thousands of beings arranged in perfect order, each knowing their place, their purpose, their limitations. The Hebrew word tsabaoth, often translated as hosts in Lord of Hosts, literally means armies, suggesting military precision in heaven's organization. Every angel had a rank, a commanding officer, a specific sphere of influence. The boundaries between these spheres were not mere suggestions, but fundamental laws woven into creation's fabric. For a Watcher to descend unbidden to earth was not simply disobedience, but cosmic treason. The angelic hierarchy served a crucial purpose beyond mere organization. It maintained the separation between the infinite divine and finite creation, providing graduated steps of holiness that prevented the physical universe from being consumed by unmediated divine presence. Each order of angels filtered and transmitted divine energy appropriate to their level, like transformers stepping down cosmic voltage to levels creation could survive. The Watchers' abandonment of their post didn't just violate protocol, it ruptured this careful insulation between dimensions. Ancient texts suggest that angels possessed what humans might call free will, though of a different nature than human choice. Their decisions carried cosmic weight because their nature was fundamentally declarative. When an angel chose, that choice resonated through multiple dimensions of reality. When 200 Watchers chose to descend, their collective decision created a fissure in heaven's architecture that could never be completely repaired. They had introduced impossibility into a system built on perfect order, and from that impossibility came the Nephilim, beings that by heaven's own laws should not, could not, must not exist. The 200 who descended, Mount Hermon's Dark Covenant. Mount Hermon rises 9,232 feet above sea level, its peak visible from the ancient cities of Damascus, Tyre, and Jerusalem. Snow crowns its summit, even in summer, and 3 nations claim portions of its slopes. But long before modern borders, before Romans or Greeks, or even ancient Israelites claimed the land below, this mountain witnessed the most audacious conspiracy in cosmic history. Here, according to the Book of Enoch, 200 angels bound themselves in an oath that would reshape reality itself. The leader was Semyaza, whose name means infamous rebellion, or he sees the name, an angel of significant rank among the Watchers. The text preserves a moment of remarkable hesitation. Semyaza, fearing that he alone would bear punishment for what they planned. "I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed," he told his followers, "and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin." But his companions swore unity in transgression, binding themselves with mutual curses, ensuring that if punishment came, it would fall on all equally. They chose shared damnation over individual innocence, corruption in brotherhood over isolated integrity. The ceremony itself, as described in ancient sources, involved rituals that inverted heavenly liturgy. Where heaven sang praise, they swore curses. Where angels traditionally declared, "Holy, holy, holy," they bound themselves with oaths of desecration. Each of the 20 leaders placed their hands upon the mountain's stones, and the very rock recorded their rebellion, becoming a witness that would testify against them at the end of days. The name Hermon itself derives from Hiram, meaning devoted to destruction or under sacred ban, as if the mountain never forgot what had been sworn upon its heights. You stand at the base of Mount Hermon at dawn, mist rising from the valleys below, the mountain's peak lost in clouds that seem to connect earth to heaven. You can feel why they chose this place. It exists between worlds, too high for comfortable human habitation, too earthly for pure spirit. The limestone caves that pocket its slopes could hide any number of secrets, and local legends still speak of giants who once dwelt in these caverns, of strange lights seen on nights when the barrier between dimensions grows thin. The mountain remembers, locals say, and sometimes you can hear the echoes of ancient oaths in the wind that howls through its passes. The names of the 20 leaders have been preserved like a cosmic indictment. Azazel, who would teach warfare, Kokabel, master of constellations, Tamiel, instructor in astronomy, Ramuel, teacher of deception, Danel, who revealed signs of the sun, Barakel, who taught astrology. Each name represents not just an individual, but a sphere of forbidden knowledge that would be released into human consciousness. The oath they swore was more than agreement to take human wives. It was a pact to fundamentally alter human development, to download celestial knowledge into minds unprepared for such revelation. The tragedy of Mount Hermon extends beyond the immediate consequences. This was the place where heaven's unity first fractured, where beings created in perfect harmony chose division and dissent. Every angel who placed his hand on that mountain knew there would be no return, no forgiveness, no restoration to their former estate. They traded eternity for a season, exchanged immortal joy for temporary pleasure, and in doing so, created a monument to the devastating power of choice when wielded by beings never meant to choose rebellion. Daughters of men, beauty that moved heaven. Who were these women whose beauty could seduce angels, whose mortal charm proved more powerful than celestial glory? Genesis provides only the briefest description. They were daughters of men, whom the sons of God saw were beautiful. But hidden in this sparse account lies one of Scripture's most profound mysteries. What quality could human women possess that would cause immortal beings to forfeit heaven itself? The Hebrew word translated as beautiful is tovot, which means more than physical attractiveness. It suggests goodness, completion, something that fulfills its intended purpose perfectly. These women were not merely pretty. They embodied something essential about human nature that the Watchers, in all their cosmic knowledge, had never encountered. They possessed mortality's unique beauty, the poignancy of temporary existence, the courage required to love when death is certain, the fierce joy of creatures who must compress eternity into fleeting moments. Ancient commentaries struggle to explain the attraction without diminishing either human or angelic dignity. Some rabbinical sources suggest these women possessed unusual qualities. Voices that carried melodies reminiscent of heaven's choir, intelligence that sparkled with divine image despite mortal limitations, or simply the mysterious attraction of difference, of otherness, that made them irresistible to beings accustomed to celestial uniformity. The Book of Enoch mentions that the women wore ornaments and painted their eyes, but this seems less about seduction and more about human culture's natural development of beauty and adornment. Consider the profound loneliness of an eternal watcher. For millennia beyond human comprehension, you observe but never participate, witness but never experience, understand but never feel. You watch humans love, lose, grieve, and love again, see them find comfort in each other's arms, observe the tender intimacies of mortal life. You understand the mathematical precision of the cosmos, can calculate the trajectory of every star, yet you've never known the simple pleasure of fingers intertwined with another's, never felt the warmth of breath on skin, never experienced the vulnerability of trust given and received. The daughters of men offered not just beauty, but entry into a realm of experience the Watchers could observe, but never access from their celestial posts. The women themselves remain frustratingly nameless in most texts, defined only by their beauty and their role in cosmic catastrophe, yet scattered traditions preserve fragments of their stories. The Book of Jasher mentions that the angels appeared to the women as handsome men, concealing their true nature until after the unions were consummated. Some accounts suggest the women were terrified when they learned their lovers' true identities. Others claim they welcomed the power and knowledge these unions brought. Their children, the Nephilim, would have revealed the truth regardless, as no purely human union could produce such beings. The tragedy encompasses both parties. The Watchers surrendered immortality for temporary companionship, while the women, whether willing or deceived, became mothers to monsters. Their beauty, that divine image reflected in mortal form, became the catalyst for corruption that would require the entire world's destruction. They stand at the intersection of heaven's desire and earth's innocence, bearing children who belonged fully to neither realm, raising offspring whose very existence violated natural law. In their faces, the watchers saw something worth falling for, and in falling, they dragged creation itself toward judgment. Born between worlds, the nature of hybrid beings. What does it mean to be born between heaven and earth? To carry both angelic power and human passion in the same body. The Nephilim existed as living contradictions, impossibilities made flesh, creatures whose very existence challenged the boundaries of created order. They inherited their father's supernatural strength and their mother's physical form, but the combination produced something neither world could contain. Beings of immense power, driven by insatiable appetite, immortal consciousness trapped in semi-mortal flesh, wisdom of the cosmos filtered through human emotion. The Book of Enoch describes their physical nature in disturbing detail. They grew to enormous height, their bodies requiring massive amounts of food to sustain the unnatural merger of spirit and flesh. Some accounts claim they stood 300 cubits tall, others more conservatively suggest 30 cubits, but all agree they were giants, whose size reflected their cosmic violation. Their bodies were human in shape, but wrong in proportion, as if the angelic nature within constantly pushed against physical boundaries, stretching and distorting human form into something monstrous. You encounter one of these beings in the twilight of the antediluvian age. Its eyes hold intelligence far beyond human, depths that seem to contain swirling galaxies, knowledge of cosmic mechanics that no earthborn creature should possess. Yet those same eyes burn with human hungers magnified to unbearable intensity. Not just desire, but desire. Not just anger, but rage. Not just hunger, but consumption. When it speaks, its voice carries harmonics that shouldn't exist, undertones that make reality shiver slightly, as if existence itself recognizes something that shouldn't be. Its presence creates a field of wrongness, a sense that fundamental laws are being violated simply by its continued existence. The psychological nature of the Nephilim proved even more disturbing than their physical form. They possessed their father's memories of heaven, but could never enter it, understood divine perfection, but were barred from experiencing it, remembered songs of celestial harmony, but could only produce distorted echoes. This cognitive dissonance drove many to madness and violence. They knew they were abominations, understood their own impossibility, yet existed nonetheless. Some texts suggest they could perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously, seeing the spiritual and physical realms overlapped, a perspective that made normal existence unbearable. Their abilities exceeded anything purely human or purely angelic. They could manipulate physical matter with thought, understanding its quantum substrate through inherited angelic knowledge. They possessed strength that could move massive stones, yet also subtle powers of persuasion that came from understanding the frequencies of human consciousness. Some accounts credit them with telepathic abilities, others with limited shapeshifting, all agreeing that they wielded powers that made them seem as gods to normal humans. Yet for all their might, they remained tragically bounded, unable to ascend to heaven, unable to find peace on earth. The Book of Giants, found at Qumran, preserves fragments of their own perspective, dreams and visions experienced by the Nephilim themselves. In these texts, they foresee their own destruction, understand that their existence is temporary, that the very cosmos rebels against their presence. They dream of a great flood, of divine judgment approaching like a tide that will wash away all evidence of their impossible existence. Yet even knowing their doom, they cannot change their nature, cannot become other than what they are, living violations of divine order, proof that some boundaries should never be crossed, reminders that not all union produces blessed offspring. Part 4. Major Myths and Episodes. Titans of the ancient earth, the reign of the giants. The world remade itself around the presence of the Nephilim. These were not merely large humans, dwelling among normal populations, but beings whose existence fundamentally altered the structure of antediluvian civilization. They became kings, not through election or inheritance, but through the simple reality that nothing could stand against them. The ancient texts speak of mighty ones who built the first great cities, who erected towers that scraped heaven's floor, who carved kingdoms from wilderness with their bare hands and ruled through a combination of supernatural power and primal fear. The Book of Jasher names some of these Titan kings: Og, who would survive the flood clinging to Noah's Ark; Sihon, whose throne was carved from a single, massive stone; the Anakim, whose very name means long-necked ones; giants, who founded city-states across Canaan. These beings didn't simply rule, they transformed the concept of rulership itself. Where human kings might command through wisdom or charisma, the Nephilim ruled through demonstrated power. They could lift stones that would require dozens of men to move, could tear apart wild beasts with their hands, could withstand injuries that would kill normal humans instantly. Archaeological mysteries across the ancient world suddenly become explicable when viewed through the lens of Nephilim construction. The massive stones of Baalbek in Lebanon, some weighing over 1,200 tons, cut with precision and moved into place by means that still defy explanation. The Cyclopean walls of ancient Peru, fitted together without mortar so perfectly that even today a knife blade cannot slip between them. The megalithic structures scattered across the globe, from Stonehenge to Easter Island, all bearing the hallmark of builders who possessed both superhuman strength and sophisticated knowledge of engineering principles. Their cities reflected their nature, everything built to inhuman scale, doorways 20 feet tall, stairs with steps that normal humans must climb, like walls, furniture that seems designed for beings 3 or 4 times human height. The ancient city of Jericho, according to some traditions, was originally a Nephilim stronghold, its famous walls built not just for defense, but to contain beings whose power could barely be controlled, even by massive fortifications. These cities became centers of technology and corruption, simultaneously places where forbidden knowledge was openly practiced and human visitors either enslaved or consumed. The social structure under Nephilim rule resembled nothing in later human history. Humans became a servant class at best, cattle at worst. The giants required enormous amounts of food, and human agriculture reorganized itself around feeding these insatiable masters. Entire harvests went to sustain a single giant family, while human populations survived on whatever remained. Some texts suggest the Nephilim instituted the practice of human sacrifice, not for religious purposes but for consumption, their corrupted nature requiring increasingly extreme forms of sustenance. Yet perhaps most disturbing was the worship they received. Humans, faced with beings of such overwhelming power, began to view the Nephilim as gods. Temples were built in their honor, prayers offered for their favor, virgin daughters presented as tribute in hope of mercy. The giants accepted this worship as their due, their inherited memories of heaven's glory twisted into demand for adoration. They became the gods of the old world, those savage deities remembered in every mythology who demanded blood and suffering from their human subjects. The reign of the giants transformed Earth into a realm where might alone determined divinity, where power replaced righteousness, where humanity's intended dominion over creation became slavery to their own corrupted offspring. Forbidden knowledge, the secrets heaven never meant to share. Knowledge fell like burning rain upon the unprepared earth. Each of the 200 watchers brought specific expertise from heaven's vast repository, and each taught their human wives and hybrid children secrets that humanity was meant to discover gradually over millennia, if at all. The Book of Enoch preserves a detailed catalogue of these revelations, a curriculum of corruption that transformed primitive humanity into something simultaneously advanced and debased, wise yet utterly without wisdom. Azazel taught the arts of war with terrible thoroughness, not just the crafting of swords and shields, but the psychology of conflict, the mathematics of siege warfare, the chemistry of poisons that could fell even the mighty. He revealed the locations of rare metals, hidden deep in the earth, showed humans how to alloy bronze that could cut through stone, how to forge weapons that channeled supernatural energies. Under his instruction, humans learned not just to kill, but to industrialize death, to make war into science rather than passion. The weapons he taught them to create were designed not for hunting or protection, but for conquest, for the subjugation of other humans and the hunting of creatures never meant to be prey. Barakel revealed the mysteries of astrology, but not the simple stargazing that humans might have developed naturally. He taught the true names of stars, the words of power that could draw down their influence, the methods by which celestial movements could be used to predict and manipulate earthly events. This was astrology as cosmic engineering, the use of planetary alignments to enhance magical workings, the knowledge of when dimensional barriers grew thin enough for summoning beings from other realms. Humans learned to read fate in the stars, but also to alter it, to bend probability through careful timing of their actions with cosmic rhythms. The women received their own terrible education. Azazel taught them the art of beautification, but these were not simple cosmetics. The text speaks of antimony and eye paint, but deeper sources suggest these were alchemical preparations that could alter perception, make the wearer appear more than human, seduce not just the body but the soul itself. They learned to paint signs on their skin that resonated with celestial frequencies, to wear metals and stones that conducted specific energies, to transform themselves into conduits for powers they barely understood. You are a young woman in those days, brought before one of the Watcher's wives to learn what they call the sacred arts. She shows you how to mix pigments that shimmer with impossible colours, hues that exist between the visible spectrum that make observers dizzy with their beauty. You learn to trace symbols on your skin that feel like they're burning cold into your flesh, marks that make you aware of presences just outside normal perception. She teaches you words in a language that predates human speech, syllables that seem to twist reality slightly when pronounced, that make flowers wilt or bloom depending on intonation. You realize with growing horror that you're being transformed into something other than purely human, that each lesson leaves you less innocent, more powerful, more damned. Penemuel introduced writing, but not the simple marking of sounds that humans might have developed for trade and memory. He taught the art of binding reality with written words, of creating contracts that compelled obedience from spiritual forces, of inscribing circles and signs that could contain or banish entities from other dimensions. This was writing as cosmic legislation, the ability to encode commands into the fabric of existence itself. Humans learned to write curses that actually worked, blessings that carried real power, words that once written could not be undone except by specific counterformulas. The medical knowledge provided by Semyaza included not just healing, but transformation. Humans learned to extend their lifespans through alchemical preparations, to enhance their physical abilities through surgical modifications, to blend the essences of different creatures into chimeric abominations. The boundaries between species became fluid under this teaching, as humans learned to incorporate animal traits, to breed impossibilities, to treat life itself as raw material for experimentation. The devouring ones, when giants consumed the world. The hunger of the Nephilim began as mere appetite, but grew into something cosmic and insatiable. Their hybrid nature created metabolic needs that no natural food source could satisfy. They required not just quantity but essence, not just matter but life force, not just food but consumption itself, as an existential act. The Book of Enoch states it plainly, and they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. The progression of their consumption follows a horrible logic. First, they exhausted the normal food supplies, eating harvests faster than humans could grow them, consuming entire herds of cattle in single feasts. Their size alone would have required enormous caloric intake, but their need went beyond mere physics. They hungered for the divine energy they had inherited, but could never fully access, trying to fill a spiritual void with physical consumption. No amount of grain or meat could satisfy what was essentially a metaphysical hunger. When conventional food sources failed, they turned to the forbidden. They began eating animals while they still lived, believing that the life force was strongest at the moment of death. They consumed creatures that humans had never considered food: predators, carrion birds, insects, anything that contained life. Some accounts suggest they could digest materials that would be toxic to humans, their hybrid constitution processing substances that normal biology couldn't tolerate. They ate soil rich with minerals, tree bark that contained ancient memories, stones that held geological power. The earth itself began to cry out under their consumption. Ancient texts describe the very ground groaning, rivers running dry not from drought, but from being drunk entirely, forests disappearing, not tree by tree, but in great swathes, as the giants consumed wood, leaves, roots, and even the mycological networks that connected forest consciousness. They were not just eating the world, but unweaving it, consuming the connections that held ecosystems together, devouring biodiversity itself. You watch from hiding as one of the Nephilim feeds. Its jaw unhinges slightly, revealing teeth that seem to exist in more rows than should be possible, each one sharp enough to shear through bone-like paper. It doesn't just eat its prey but seems to absorb it, the victim's life force visibly dimming as it's consumed, leaving behind not just a corpse, but something less than a corpse, matter drained of whatever animating principle once gave it meaning. The giant's eyes glow brighter with each swallow, as if it's stealing not just flesh, but the very concept of the creature it devours. The air around it shimmers with heat that isn't quite physical, reality bending under the weight of its impossible hunger. The final phase of their consumption was the most horrific. They turned on humanity, and eventually on each other. Humans became prey, hunted not for sport but for food. Entire villages would disappear overnight, their populations consumed in orgies of feeding that left only strange marks on stone, where reality had been stressed by the violence of the consumption. The giants developed preferences, some favouring children for their innocence, others the elderly for their accumulated life experience, still others, those in the prime of life, for their vitality. When humans became scarce, hidden in caves and deep forests, the Nephilim began consuming each other. The Book of Giants describes dreams of the giants foreseeing this cannibalistic fate, brother devouring brother in hunger that could never be satisfied. They understood that they were not just eating, but being eaten, that their consumption was simultaneously self-destruction, that they were devouring the very world that sustained them, yet they couldn't stop, their nature compelling them toward consumption, even as it guaranteed their extinction. The Great Cleansing, waters above and below. God's decision to flood the earth was not made in haste or anger, but in the profound sorrow of a creator watching creation devour itself. Genesis records the divine lament. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. This was not disappointment, but cosmic grief, the recognition that the experiment of free will had produced an outcome so corrupted that only complete erasure could prevent ultimate dissolution. The Nephilim had introduced an element into creation that threatened to unravel existence itself, and the flood was less punishment than emergency surgery to remove a cancer that had metastasized throughout the earth. The waters that would cleanse the earth came from two sources, perfectly inverting the creation order established in Genesis. On the second day of creation, God had separated the waters above from the waters below, creating a space between them where life could flourish. Now, in the flood, these separated waters would reunite, the windows of heaven opening while the fountains of the great deep burst forth. This was not merely rain, but a cosmic collapse. The careful boundaries of creation temporarily dissolved to wash away the violations that threatened all existence. Noah, described as perfect in his generations, represented something crucial: uncorrupted human genetics. The phrase suggests not moral perfection, but biological purity, DNA untainted by Nephilim hybridization. His family preserved the original human template, the image of God in material form, without angelic admixture. The ark he built was not just a boat, but a genetic repository, a seed vault for restarting creation without the contamination that had necessitated its destruction. Every clean animal taken in sevens, every unclean in pairs, all carefully preserved to restore the world after its cleansing. The Book of Enoch provides details Genesis omits about the flood's effect on the Nephilim. The giants, despite their power, could not survive the waters. Their hybrid nature, which had made them mighty, also made them vulnerable to this specific judgment. The flood waters carried properties beyond the merely physical, a divine antipathy to the unnatural mixing of heavenly and earthly essence. As the waters rose, the giants discovered that their great strength meant nothing against this liquid judgment. They could not swim to safety, for there was no safety. They could not climb high enough, for the waters covered the highest mountains. They could not use their inherited knowledge to escape, for this was not a natural disaster but a supernatural cleansing. Yet their end was not simple drowning. The texts suggest that as the Nephilim died, their spirits, having no proper place in the cosmic order, became something else. Demons, disembodied entities trapped between heaven and earth, unable to ascend, unable to fully die. Their bodies were destroyed, but their essential violation of natural order continued in spiritual form, explaining the origin of evil spirits that would plague humanity even after the flood. The physical giants were gone, but their spiritual residue remained like radiation from a cosmic disaster. The flood lasted not 40 days, but 150, the waters prevailing on the earth for 5 months before beginning their slow retreat. During this time, the earth underwent fundamental reconstitution. The massive water pressure compressed geological layers, creating the fossil record that would puzzle future generations. The pre-flood atmosphere, possibly denser and more hospitable to gigantic life forms, was stripped away. The very nature of physical reality shifted, making it impossible for beings of Nephilim scale to exist again, even if the biological conditions for their creation somehow recurred. After the deluge, the return of the giants. The flood should have ended the story of the Nephilim completely, yet Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua all speak of giants in the post-flood world. The spies sent into Canaan returned with terrifying reports. We saw the Nephilim there, the sons of Anak who come from the Nephilim, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. This presents a theological and historical puzzle that has troubled scholars for millennia. If the flood destroyed all Nephilim, how could they exist afterward? Several ancient traditions attempt to explain this impossibility. The Book of Og claims that Og, king of Bashan, survived by clinging to the outside of Noah's Ark. Sustained by food, Noah passed through a small opening. His agreement to serve Noah and his descendants earned him passage through the deluge, though he remained forever marked by his origins. This tale, whether literal or symbolic, suggests that the Nephilim contamination was never completely erased, that traces of the original violation persisted despite the cosmic cleansing. Another explanation involves timing and terminology. The phrase in Genesis stating the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, might indicate a second incursion of fallen angels after the flood, though on a smaller scale. The post-flood giants, while still massive and powerful, never reached the apocalyptic scale of their predecessors. They were regional threats rather than cosmic ones, powerful enough to terrorize normal humans, but not enough to threaten creation's fabric. The names change as well: Anakim, Rephaim, Emim, Zamzumim, suggesting either different tribes of giants or different cultural names for the same phenomenon. The archaeological record preserves tantalizing suggestions of their presence: massive burial mounds containing skeletal remains of unusual size, though most have mysteriously disappeared after their initial discovery. Stone circles and dolmens across Canaan that match the construction techniques of pre-flood megaliths. Ancient copper mines in the Levant, worked by someone capable of moving massive stone blocks and leaving tool marks, suggesting implements of unusual size. The city of Hebron, called Kiryat Arba, or City of Four, named after 4 giant brothers who once ruled there. You stand with the Israelite spies at the edge of the Promised Land, looking across valleys where cities squat like massive stones dropped by titans. The walls of these cities rise impossibly high, Built from blocks you couldn't move with 100 men. In the fields, you glimpse figures that, at first, seem like trees until they move, revealing themselves as humans of impossible scale, their voices carrying across distances like low thunder. Your companions whisper of fruit so large, it takes 2 men to carry a single cluster of grapes, of a land flowing with milk and honey, but guarded by beings that should not exist, remnants of a world God himself had washed away. Yet here they stand, as if the flood had been merely an interruption rather than an ending. The systematic elimination of these post-flood giants reads like a divine mop-up operation. Joshua, Caleb, and later David were specifically tasked with destroying the remaining giant clans. The conquest of Canaan was not just about claiming land, but about finishing what the flood had started, erasing the last physical traces of the Nephilim from the earth. David's killing of Goliath, that 9-foot champion of Gath, represents more than a young shepherd's triumph over a warrior. It was the symbolic moment when purely human courage, backed by divine authority, proved superior to hybrid might. The last biblical mention of giants involves David's mighty men killing the remaining sons of Rapha in Gath, including one with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, a genetic marker of his contaminated origin. After this, the giants vanish from the historical record. Their age finally ended not by cosmic flood, but by systematic human action. Yet their memory persisted, in place names, in massive ruins, in the collective unconscious of humanity that still dreams of titans and still fears what might descend from heaven to claim the daughters of men. Part 5. Heroes and Legendary Figures. Nimrod the Hunter, challenging heaven once more. Nimrod emerges from the post-flood world like a dark echo of the giants themselves, a figure whose very existence suggests that the spirit of the Nephilim, if not their physical presence, survived the deluge. Genesis calls him a mighty hunter before the Lord, but the Hebrew phrase lifnei Yahweh can mean either before or against the Lord, and ancient traditions overwhelmingly favour the latter interpretation. He was humanity's first attempt to reclaim the power the Nephilim had wielded, not through hybrid birth but through human will pressed to its absolute limits. The genealogies place Nimrod as the great-grandson of Noah through Ham's line, making him close enough to the flood to have heard first-hand accounts of the world before the waters, yet far enough removed to romanticize, rather than fear, that lost age. His very name derives from marad, meaning to rebel, as if his parents recognized in their infant son a spirit that would not accept the oppressed, diminished, post-flood human condition. He grew into a man of unusual size and strength, not giant perhaps, but large enough that some traditions suggest Nephilim blood had somehow survived in Ham's line, diluted but not destroyed. The cities Nimrod founded read like a roster of humanity's greatest rebellions against divine order: Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh in the land of Shinar, then Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Resen in Assyria. These were not mere settlements but statements of defiance, each one built according to principles the Watchers had taught, incorporating sacred geometry that channeled terrestrial energies, aligned with celestial bodies in ways that suggested communication with powers beyond Earth. Nimrod had somehow recovered or rediscovered portions of the antediluvian knowledge, the forbidden learning that should have drowned with the giants. Ancient Jewish texts preserve stranger details about Nimrod's power source. The Book of Jasher claims he possessed the garments God had made for Adam and Eve, clothes of light that had been passed down through the generations and stolen by Ham during the flood. When worn, these garments made Nimrod invincible in battle and gave him dominion over animals, explaining his title as Mighty Hunter. He didn't simply hunt beasts, but hunted the remaining monsters of the pre-flood world, creatures that had survived in deep caves or remote mountains, genetic throwbacks to the age of giants. Some traditions claim he hunted the spirits of the Nephilim themselves, using knowledge gleaned from forbidden texts to bind and command the demons that were once giants. The Tower of Babel represents Nimrod's ultimate achievement and failure, an attempt to build what the Nephilim had possessed by birthright, a bridge between heaven and earth. The structure was not merely tall, but designed according to specifications that would create a permanent, dimensional portal, a stairway that spiritual beings could descend and humans could ascend. The confusion of languages that God imposed was not punishment but prevention, stopping humanity from achieving, artificially, what the Watchers had accomplished through violation. Nimrod had come too close to reopening the door the flood had sealed. You walk through the ruins of Babylon at sunset, where local guides still point to massive foundations they claim are remnants of Nimrod's tower. The bricks are unusual, baked with substances that give them an oily sheen, inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Locals say that on certain nights, when the moon is dark and the stars align in particular patterns, you can hear voices speaking in the original tongue, the language from before the confusion, words of power that Nimrod spoke when he still thought heaven could be conquered by human ambition. They warn against listening too closely, for understanding even a single word can drive men to madness, to dreams of towers that pierce the sky and hunts that never end. David and the Last Giants, the shepherd who ended an age. David ben Jesse stands at the intersection of two ages, the last human to face giants as a divine calling rather than random encounter. When he walked into the valley of Elah, carrying 5 smooth stones, he carried more than a shepherd's sling. He bore the weight of prophecy, the promise that human seed would triumph over serpent corruption, that mankind's dominion over earth would be restored not through hybrid power, but through faith coupled with courage. His confrontation with Goliath was staged as cosmic drama, the final act in a conflict that began when angels first looked upon human women with desire. Goliath of Gath stood 9 feet 6 inches tall, according to the Hebrew text, 6 feet 6 inches in the Septuagint, but either height marked him as other than purely human. He was one of the Rephaim, those terrible ones, who traced their lineage back through shadowy genealogies to the pre-flood giants. His armour weighed 125 pounds of bronze. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point of his spear weighed 15 pounds. These details matter because they establish that Goliath was not mythologically large but historically massive, not impossibly giant, but undeniably beyond normal human scale. He was what remained of the Nephilim after generations of dilution, still terrible, but no longer apocalyptic. The challenge Goliath issued to Israel's armies followed ancient protocols of giant warfare. Single combat between champions was how the Nephilim had settled disputes in the Old World, their individual might making armies irrelevant. For 40 days, Goliath stood between the armies and demanded someone meet him in the ancient way, champion against champion, winner take all. The Israelites, faced with this echo of antediluvian combat, froze in terror. They had forgotten that the age of giants was ending, that divine favour had shifted decisively to pure humanity. David's preparation reveals deep understanding of what he faced. The 5 stones he selected from the brook were not random, but carefully chosen, smooth and round, perfect for slinging. Some rabbinical traditions claim he inscribed each stone with a name: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, invoking the covenant line that stood in opposition to the corrupted bloodlines of the giants. His refusal of Saul's armour was not mere comfort but theological statement. He would not meet the giant with the giant's tools, but with implements of simple humanity enhanced by divine blessing. You crouch with the Israelite army on the hillside, watching this impossible scene unfold in the valley below. The giant moves with disturbing grace for something so large, his bronze armour catching the morning sun like the scales of some ancient dragon. Then you see the shepherd boy, looking absurdly small as he descends into the valley, carrying no visible weapons, except a sling that looks like a child's toy. The giant laughs, and the sound rolls across the valley like thunder, promising to feed the boy's flesh to the birds and beasts. But there's something in the way the boy moves, a confidence that seems to make him larger with each step, as if he's drawing power from the earth itself, from the covenant, from the promise that giants' time has passed. The stone that felled Goliath struck with more than physical force. It carried the weight of divine judgment, the final declaration that the age of hybrid power was over. When David then used Goliath's own sword to remove his head, he was not just ensuring death but making a statement that would echo through the ancient world. The weapons of the giants would become the instruments of their destruction. The massive sword would later be kept at the sanctuary at Nob, a trophy not of personal victory but of cosmic transition. David's giant killing did not end with Goliath. The biblical record notes that he and his mighty men systematically eliminated the remaining giant clans. Ishbi-Benob, who carried a bronze spear weighing 300 shekels, Saph, another descendant of Rapha, the brother of Goliath, named Lami in Chronicles, who wielded a spear identical to Goliath's. Most disturbing of all, the unnamed giant with 12 fingers and 12 toes, whose polydactyly marked him as carrying the genetic signature of angelic contamination. Each death was not murder, but exorcism, removing from the earth the last physical traces of heaven's ancient violation. The transition from Saul to David as king of Israel parallels the transition from the age of giants to the age of men. Saul, who stood head and shoulders above other Israelites, who was chosen partly for his impressive physical stature, failed as king because he tried to fight the old battles with the old understanding. David, small enough that his own father forgot to present him to Samuel, young enough that his brothers mocked his ambition, became the king who would finally secure human dominion over the promised land. In David, humanity reclaimed through faith and covenant what the Nephilim had seized through violation and power. The shepherd's stone that felled Goliath didn't just kill a giant. It closed a chapter of cosmic history that began when angels first descended on Mount Hermon. Part 6. Cultural Impact and Practices. Stones too heavy for men. Megalithic mysteries. Across the earth, from the temples of Malta to the platforms of Easter Island, from the circles of Britain to the fortress walls of Peru, stand monuments that archaeology cannot adequately explain. These structures share disturbing commonalities. Stones of impossible weight, moved across impossible distances, fitted with precision that modern technology struggles to replicate, aligned with celestial bodies, according to knowledge that supposedly primitive peoples should not have possessed. Orthodox archaeology offers theories involving ramps, rollers, and massive human labour forces. But anyone who has stood before these monuments knows in their bones that something else was at work here, something that operated according to different physical laws, or possessed radically different physical capabilities. The Trilithon at Baalbek in Lebanon presents the most dramatic challenge to conventional explanation. 3 stones, each weighing approximately 800 tons, lifted 20 feet into the air and fitted so precisely that a sheet of paper cannot slip between them. In the nearby quarry lies an even larger stone, the stone of the pregnant woman, weighing an estimated 1,200 tons, abandoned as if its movers were suddenly interrupted. Roman historians who built their own temples on top of these foundations openly admitted they had no idea how the original platform was constructed, referring to it as the work of giants from the age before the flood. The transportation problem alone defies solution. Modern heavy-lift cranes max out around 1,000 tons under ideal conditions with extensive ground preparation. Yet these ancient builders moved blocks weighing nearly as much across rough terrain, up hillsides, across valleys, then lifted them stories into the air and placed them with millimetre precision. The stones at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, some weighing over 200 tons, were allegedly brought from quarries miles away, up mountainsides, then fitted together in complex polygonal patterns that have survived centuries of earthquakes without mortar. Each stone's unique shape interlocks with its neighbours, like a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, planned by an intelligence that could visualise complex spatial relationships with superhuman clarity. You run your hands along the joints between these massive stones, feeling the precision that no amount of slave labour could achieve. The surface has been polished to glass smoothness, yet when you look closely, you see tool marks that make no sense. scoops taken out of granite, as if it were soft clay, drill holes that go deeper than any ancient drill should reach, internal corners cut with something that could reach inside solid rock. Local legends consistently speak of a time when the stones were soft, when giants sang to them and they moved like living things, when the builders understood the frequency of matter itself and could command stones to flow into place like water finding its level. The astronomical alignments add another layer of impossibility. These structures encode sophisticated knowledge of precession, stellar positions, lunar cycles, and planetary movements. Stonehenge marks not just solstices but lunar standstills that occur every 18.6 years. The pyramids of Giza align with Orion's belt as it appeared in 10,500 BC, not when they were supposedly built. Angkor Wat mirrors the constellation Draco as it would have appeared in the same epoch. These monuments seem designed by beings who thought in cosmic timescales, who built not just for their generation, but for millennia, encoding knowledge that would survive any catastrophe short of the Earth's destruction. The construction techniques themselves suggest builders who manipulated matter at a fundamental level. The H-blocks at Puma Punku in Bolivia feature internal angles and precise drilling that would require sophisticated machinery, yet they predate any known civilization capable of such work. Some stones show evidence of vitrification, their surfaces turned to glass by heat so intense it would require temperatures approaching those of nuclear reactions. Others display magnetic anomalies, as if exposed to powerful electromagnetic fields during their shaping. The builders left behind monuments that mock our understanding of ancient capabilities, structures that whisper of a time when beings of godlike power walked the earth and built according to principles we have forgotten or never knew. The giant mythos, from Mesopotamia to the Americas. The memory of giants transcends all cultural boundaries, appearing in the foundational myths of every civilization, as if humanity shares a collective trauma too profound to forget. From the Titans of Greek mythology to the Jotnar of Norse legend, from the Asuras of Hindu tradition to the Sea-Te-Ka of Native American lore, every culture preserves accounts of massive beings who preceded current humanity, who possessed tremendous power, who often stood in opposition to both gods and men, and who were ultimately destroyed in cataclysmic conflicts that reshaped the world. The Mesopotamian tradition, humanity's oldest written memory, speaks of the Anunnaki, those who came down from heaven. The Sumerian king list describes rulers before the flood whose reigns lasted tens of thousands of years, whose heights were measured in cubits beyond normal men, who taught humanity the arts of civilization before being swept away by divine judgment. Gilgamesh himself, that first epic hero, was described as 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, a mathematical impossibility unless one considers hybrid ancestry. His enormous strength, his ability to fight celestial bulls and survive, his desperate quest for immortality that his mixed nature denied him, all echo the Nephilim narrative through a Mesopotamian lens. Greek mythology preserves perhaps the most detailed, non-biblical account in its stories of the Titans and their offspring. These beings, born from the union of heaven and earth, ruled during the Golden Age before being overthrown by the Olympian gods. Their children with human women produced heroes like Heracles, whose incredible strength and tragic fate mirror the mighty men of renown mentioned in Genesis. The Greek flood narrative of Deucalion explicitly states it was sent to destroy the bronze race of humans who had become violent and corrupt, a generation that Greek historians like Hesiod associated with demigods and heroes of impossible deed. Moving eastward, Hindu traditions speak of multiple races of giants. The Asuras, powerful beings constantly at war with the Devas, possessed mighty weapons and great cities, but were ultimately evil in nature. The Rakshasas, shape-shifting giants who consumed human flesh, terrorized the earth until heroes like Rama destroyed them. The Daityas, giants born from a primordial mother, rebelled against cosmic order and had to be subdued by divine avatars. These beings possessed Maya, the ability to create illusions and manipulate reality knowledge that exceeded human understanding yet fell short of divine wisdom. You sit with indigenous elders in the American Southwest as they tell stories passed down for countless generations. They speak of the Ka, red-haired giants who were cannibals, who made war on the ancestors until they were finally trapped in a cave and destroyed by fire. They point to massive bones found in ancient caves, to pictographs showing small humans fighting enormous enemies, to place names that translate as "where the giants died" or "home of the big men." The stories vary in detail, but never in essence. There were giants, they were evil, they were destroyed, but their memory must be preserved as warning. Norse mythology describes the Jotnar, the giants who existed before the gods, who lived in Jotunheim and constantly threatened both Asgard and Midgard. These beings could interbreed with gods and humans, producing offspring of tremendous power but uncertain loyalty. The Norse Ragnarok, like the biblical flood, represents a cosmic cleansing where giants and gods alike are destroyed to make way for a renewed world. The Prose Edda preserves genealogies of giants that read like the Book of Enoch, careful records of who begat whom, which giant possessed which power, how they were ultimately overcome. The universality of these myths suggests more than cultural diffusion or borrowed stories. The specific details vary, but the core elements remain consistent. Beings of great size and power, often connected to divine or celestial origins, who possessed advanced knowledge, who became corrupt and violent, who were destroyed in a global catastrophe, but whose influence somehow persisted. Even isolated cultures, with no contact with biblical or Western traditions, preserve these memories. The Aztecs spoke of the Quinametsin, giants who built the Pyramid of Cholula before being destroyed. Japanese mythology describes the Oni and Daidarabotchi, giants who shaped the landscape and troubled humanity. Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime speaks of the Namorodo, sky beings who became corrupt and had to be turned to stone. These parallel traditions preserve not just stories, but warnings. They remind humanity that power without restraint leads to destruction, that the boundaries between divine and human exist for reasons, that some knowledge comes at too high a price. The giant myths encode humanity's deepest anxieties about power, violation, and the consequences of overreaching our ordained limits. They whisper that we have faced beings of terrible might before, that we survived but at tremendous cost, and that the potential for such beings to rise again lurks in the shadows of human ambition and celestial temptation. Part 7. Modern Legacy. In our blood and bones, the search for genetic echoes. Modern genetics has opened doors that perhaps should have remained closed, revealing anomalies in human DNA that whisper of ancient violations. Scientists studying the human genome have found that we carry within us genetic material from at least 2 extinct hominid species, Neanderthals and Denisovans, beings different enough to be separate species, yet similar enough to produce viable offspring with Homo sapiens. But there are other sequences, mysterious portions of our genetic code that don't match any known terrestrial primate, segments that some researchers privately call ghost DNA, genetic echoes of ancestors who left no fossils, no bones, only these cryptic sequences embedded in our cells, like encrypted messages from a forgotten age. The search for physical evidence of giants has produced a frustrating pattern of discovery and disappearance. Newspaper accounts from the 19th and early 20th centuries describe numerous discoveries of enormous skeletal remains. The Smithsonian Institution's own records, from the 1800s, mention multiple findings of skeletons, ranging from 7 to 12 feet tall, discovered in burial mounds across North America. Yet when modern researchers attempt to locate these specimens, they find only empty storage spaces, missing catalogue entries, and official statements that such discoveries never occurred or were misidentified. The bones vanish, the records disappear, and only the newspaper accounts remain, dismissed as journalistic sensationalism from a less scientific age. Contemporary archaeological discoveries continue to challenge the standard narrative. In 2013, excavations in northern Israel uncovered pottery shards bearing fingerprints 30% larger than normal human prints. DNA analysis of tooth enamel from ancient burial sites occasionally yields results that laboratories refuse to publish, sequences that don't fit the established human family tree. Ground-penetrating radar reveals burial chambers beneath ancient sites that authorities refuse to excavate, claiming various technical or bureaucratic obstacles that prevent investigation. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidence. Whenever evidence emerges that might confirm unusual human variants in our past, it either vanishes or becomes inaccessible. You sit in a genetics laboratory at 3 a.m., alone with equipment that can read the Book of Life itself. On your screen appears a DNA sequence from an ancient tooth found in a Peruvian cave, a sequence your supervisor told you to delete and forget. But you can't forget the anomalies, chromosomal structures that seem impossible, genes that code for proteins no human should produce, regulatory sequences that would theoretically allow for bone density and muscle attachment points, far exceeding human norms. The sample is 3,000 years old, placing it well within recorded history, yet it suggests a being that couldn't exist according to everything you've been taught. You realize you're looking at evidence of something that officialdom has decided must not exist, proof of bloodlines that challenge our understanding of human origins. The medical anomalies present their own mysteries. Certain rare genetic conditions produce effects reminiscent of legendary giant traits. Acromegaly and gigantism cause excessive growth, but victims suffer from numerous health problems and shortened lifespans. Yet historical accounts describe giants who lived for centuries, who possessed not just size but proportional strength and health. Some researchers propose that the Nephilim possessed a different genetic mechanism for their size, one that we occasionally see hints of in modern anomalies. Individuals who grow to unusual height without the typical associated pathologies, people whose strength exceeds what their muscle mass should produce, cases of polydactyly that match biblical descriptions of six-fingered giants. Blood type distributions offer another puzzle. Rh-negative blood, possessed by only 15% of the human population, behaves like a recent insertion into the human genome. It causes rejection reactions in pregnancy, as if the body recognizes it as foreign, requiring medical intervention unknown until the modern era. Some theorists suggest this represents a remnant of non-human genetic material, a marker of bloodlines that trace back to unions that should never have occurred. The highest concentrations of Rh-negative blood occur in populations with strong traditions of giants and ancient astronauts, the Basques, the Berbers, certain Celtic populations. The giants that never left. Enduring influence on human consciousness. The Nephilim haunt us still, not as physical presences, but as psychological archetypes that shape our deepest fears and highest aspirations. Every culture produces stories of giants because every human psyche contains the memory, whether genetic or spiritual, of a time when we were not the dominant force on Earth, when beings of tremendous power walked among us as rulers, teachers, and predators. This memory expresses itself in our mythology, our literature, our dreams, and increasingly, in our technology as we unconsciously attempt to recreate the power the giants wielded. Modern superhero mythology represents the return of the Nephilim in sanitized form. Superman, arriving from the heavens with powers beyond mortal ken. The X-Men, genetic mutants representing the next stage of human evolution, or perhaps a return to an earlier hybrid state. The Marvel and DC universes teem with beings of impossible power who intervene in human affairs, who mate with humans producing superpowered offspring, who must choose between protecting or dominating the normal humans around them. We tell these stories obsessively, as if preparing ourselves for a return of the mighty ones, or perhaps trying to become them ourselves. The transhumanist movement explicitly seeks to recreate what the Watchers allegedly gave humanity: extended lifespans, enhanced physical capabilities, expanded consciousness, the ability to manipulate matter at will. Through genetic engineering, cybernetic enhancement, and consciousness uploading, modern science pursues the same violations that brought divine judgment in ancient times. CRISPR technology allows us to edit the genome itself, to introduce traits that natural evolution would never produce. Neural interfaces promise to download knowledge directly into human consciousness, bypassing the slow acquisition of wisdom through experience. We stand at the threshold of artificially creating what the Nephilim possessed by hybrid birth. Architecture continues to reflect our giant memories. Our skyscrapers reach toward heaven with the same ambition that drove Nimrod's tower. We build structures that dwarf human scale, creating spaces that make normal humans feel appropriately small. The corporate towers of Manhattan, the massive government buildings of capital cities, the enormous stadiums where we gather to watch modern gladiators compete, all echo the giant architecture of the antediluvian world. We build as if we were giants, or as if we're expecting them to return. You dream the same dream that humans have always dreamed. You are small, running through a landscape of massive stones, pursued by something enormous, whose footsteps shake the earth. You hide in spaces too small for the giant to reach, but you know it's only temporary safety. The giant speaks in a language that predates words, makes offers of power and knowledge that part of you desperately wants to accept. You wake with your heart racing, the dream so vivid, you check your windows to make sure nothing enormous is peering in. This dream, reported across all cultures and ages, suggests a species-wide trauma, a collective memory of when humanity was prey to beings we had no power to resist. The influence extends into our power structures. We create institutions of inhuman scale, corporations and governments that operate according to logic divorced from human experience. These entities consume resources with Nephilim-like appetite, impose their will through overwhelming force, demand worship in the form of loyalty and labor. We have recreated the social structure of the giant age. Massive entities ruling over normal humans who feel powerless to resist. The giants no longer need bodies when they can incorporate, no longer need physical strength when they control economic and political power. Even our environmental crisis echoes the Nephilim narrative. We consume the Earth's resources faster than they can regenerate, devour biodiversity, pollute the waters and air until the Earth itself groans under our weight. Like the giants who ate everything until cannibalism was their only option, we consume our planet with full knowledge that we're destroying our only home. The climate change we've triggered threatens a cleansing as complete as the flood, not divine judgment, but natural consequence of appetites grown beyond all bounds. The giants never truly left because they transformed from physical to psychological reality. They live in our dreams of power, our fear of powerlessness, our desire to transcend human limitations, our terror of those who successfully do so. Every child who imagines having superpowers, every adult who fears government surveillance, every scientist who pushes the boundaries of genetic modification, every architect who builds beyond human scale, carries within them the echo of the Nephilim age. We are haunted by giants because we remember being ruled by them, and because we suspect that given the opportunity, we would become them ourselves. We began with a paradox. Beings too troublesome for heaven to contain, yet too divine for earth to accept. Now, having traced their story from the summit of Mount Hermon to the valley of Elah, from antediluvian corruption to post-flood extinction, we find that the paradox was never resolved but merely transformed. The Nephilim could not exist, yet they did. They were completely destroyed, yet their influence persists. They were erased from the earth, yet we cannot forget them. Perhaps this is their true legacy, not the massive stones they moved or the cities they built, but the impossible questions they embedded in human consciousness. Questions about the nature of boundaries, the price of knowledge, and the terrible consequences when heaven's desire meets earth's innocence. The physical traces remain for those who know where to look. Stand before the trilithon at Baalbek and try to imagine any technology, ancient or modern, that could move those stones. Walk among the megaliths scattered across the earth, from Stonehenge to Sacsayhuaman, and feel the presence of builders who operated according to different principles. Examine the tool marks on granite surfaces that suggest instruments we cannot replicate, the drill holes that go deeper than they should, the precision that defies explanation. These monuments stand as testimony to a time when beings of tremendous power shaped the physical world according to their will, leaving behind structures that challenge our understanding of what human history should contain. The lessons for our modern age emerge with uncomfortable clarity. We live in a time when genetic boundaries dissolve through scientific manipulation, when humans reach toward abilities that once belonged to legend, when the promise of transcending our limitations through technology echoes the ancient promise of becoming like gods. The Nephilim remind us that some boundaries exist for reasons beyond our understanding, that power without wisdom breeds monsters, that the desire to rise above our ordained nature might cost us our humanity itself. They whisper warning through the centuries: beware of shortcuts to divinity, be suspicious of power that comes too easily. Remember that every hybrid creation carries within it the seeds of its own impossibility. I'm grateful you chose to explore these ancient paths alongside me, to walk through the shadows of a history that orthodox teaching often ignores, to confront the disturbing possibility that our past contains violations too profound to fully comprehend. May the whispers of history lull you into deep, restorative sleep.